Week 1 is in the books, and we're not letting up for Week 2. Welcome to the Jason Fitz Show, brought to you by LittleTeammates.com. Another week means another slew of awesome guests. Be sure to stay at the website, JasonFitz.com. We're going to start archiving these old interviews. I know you guys still want to be able to go back and check out John Clayton that came on last week, Chad Withrow, Jeff Lockridge from the Tennessean. We had Mike Chappell from the Indianapolis Star, Steve Corcoran from the Bay Area News Group, and we did the Coach's Corner segment, which got awesome feedback for Coach Lance Leipold coming on last Friday and giving us a coach's perspective on college football. Well, we're going to archive all that on the webpage so you can still get to it. Make sure you're hitting up my social media page. And today, we've got yet another guest and more hot topics coming. I've got some thoughts on this whole Oklahoma State thing. I know that's a shocker. I've got a ton of thoughts on Week 1, some ideas on Week 2, and we've got an awesome guest lined up. Sports Illustrated's Jim Trotter is coming on. He's going to give us a little of the same flavor that you get to read on West Coast State of Mind on the Monday Morning Quarterback Series. He's going to give us some of that on a Wednesday with the Jason Fitz Show. We're going to talk a little bit of Chargers. We're going to talk a lot of Raiders. We're going to talk the West Coast as it is. So hit me up, jasonfitz.com. Make sure you email me, thejasonfitzshow@gmail.com. Guys, don't be afraid to ask, too. Is there a beat writer you want on the show? Is there somebody you want me to get on a Wednesday or Friday or a Sunday? We'll make it happen. So stick with us. You're listening to The Jason Fitz Show, brought to you by LittleTeammates.com. After these messages, we'll be right back.
Why just pay for gas by the gallon when for just a little more, you can have the full service experience offered only at Big Jugs Easy Mart? And Big Jugs Easy Mart isn't just the world's best pumping experience. We also handle your oil changes. Why deal with it yourself when one of our gorgeous service specialists can make sure your tank is completely empty?
Together with your service girl, you can make sure your engine is revving and ready for optimum performance.
Service with a smile is a good start, but service with Big Jugs is an even better finish.
In 1966, Woody Hayes is one of several people credited with saying this, but he said all the way back in 66, there's a theory that when you pass the football, 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad. I grew up hearing that expression. My dad used to say it when we would watch football games, and it was a huge part of watching football growing up. You knew that if your team had a solid running game, if your team could stop the run, if you had a solid defense and a decent pass rush, and you could run the ball, you could go to the playoffs and maybe even win a Super Bowl. So, flash forward. Bring me to Week 1 of the NFL. It's staggering, the change in that. The change in philosophies is insane. When you look at the number of passes being thrown, it's crazy to me that the game plans are being done like this. Who made this game plan up for the Ravens? I mean, did they just sit there and play Madden? Is that how they came up with it? They played Madden all night, and they were like, hey, this works in Madden. You know how frustrating it is? Like, when you play Madden against somebody, and you're sitting there, and like, I consider myself a very good Madden player, and I sit down and I play with somebody, and you're rolling at the game, and the person you're playing against just keeps throwing the ball 50 yards down the field, just keeps throwing the bomb. It gets so frustrating because you look at it and you say, man, dude, you would never watch a football game and see somebody do this. Emulate the game and you'll have more success. Mix in some short passes, run the ball, and you'll actually win a Madden game. Well, that's what I felt like screaming at the TV when I was watching the Ravens-Broncos game. And it's not just the Ravens-Broncos game. I mean, it's the Browns. It's so many quarterbacks that just came in and threw the football. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you're playing against the Broncos, what you don't want to do is match them play for play. If you're playing against the Eagles, you don't want to try and keep up with that offense. You want to try and slow that offense down, and then you want to control the ball so that your defense can rest and so that you don't get into a shootout. You're not going to beat the Broncos in a shootout. Can anybody tell me what they were thinking and why that game plan was even remotely written that way? So what's the solution? Well, I mean, history is cyclical. We can say that about general history. Well, you can also say that about the NFL. And there's always these points where run and shoot type offenses become a fad. They become big. And then what's going to happen is people will figure out that they need to slow the game down. So here's my prediction. I'm rubbing the crystal ball. I'm looking at the offenses over the next couple of years. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to find a way to combat it by slowing the game down, which means we're going to start to cycle back towards a strong running game and controlling the clock. Now, I think John Clayton made a great point when he was on the show last week. He talked about how the quarterbacks are going to take more hits as they run these option sort of offenses, and that's going to stop that because, you can't put your quarterback in that sort of harm's way, especially with the NFL coming in and not siding with Harbaugh on their ruling about quarterbacks and how they should be treated when they are running. The quarterback is in harm's way. But still, when you look at the way to combat these game plans, it's very simple. You've got to have a stout offensive line, a stout running back, and the ability to hold on to the football. That's the best way to combat the Broncos, is just to keep punching them in the mouth. And then you hope when you get into the playoffs, like we've seen so many times, when the weather turns, if you're at an outdoor Super Bowl in New York and it's snowing and there's ice everywhere and you can't throw the football, you have a chance to win the game. We're not seeing something revolutionary. Yes, we're seeing faster offenses. Yes, we're seeing new plays being run differently. But come on, we're not that far removed from the greatest show on turf. In other words, this too shall pass. And when it does, I think what you're going to find is a return to the normal football that we grew up watching. And that'll last for a few years until people figure out that you can spread that out and do some damage by speeding up the game. And it never ends. The cycle never stops. The last big NFL thought that really hits me is watching just the hype for Thursday Night Football. I mean, obviously, I know they need to hype the game, but they are just desperately trying to make the Jets into something that's worth watching. Can we just admit that they're irrelevant? Can we just stop talking about them until there's something to talk about? I mean, can we wait until Geno Smith has played enough to figure out if he's even worth discussing? Can we just ignore it? It's like Westboro Baptist Church. I mean, the more press we give things like that, the more they happen. I mean, if nobody talks about Miley Cyrus twerking all over her foam finger, then it just goes away and she disappears. But instead, we just talk about it. And that's what the New York Jets are. Congratulations, Jets. You are fluff that has been made into something that everybody feels like they have to watch. You are Miley Cyrus's foam finger. And in the meantime, I'm just not going to pay attention to it because all I'm hoping is that you'll go away until you're worth watching. You're listening to The Jason Fitz Show, brought to you by LilTeammates.com, LILTeammates.com. Go to the website, use the coupon code FitzFans to get 20% off your order.
Finally, a GPS that talks to you and to the idiots driving around you. Simply attach the all-weather speaker to the outside of the car and let Road Rage Randy take it from there. With phrases like,
"No, it's okay. You don't need to use a turn signal. Come on in. I'll gladly make room.
And
Take your time. Green obviously means thinking about going.
And even,
I wish more people would drive with their knees while they put mascara on. Great idea."
with thousands of pre-programmed sayings and the ability to even program your own, you can finally purge the rage driving gives you with your new best driving friend, Road Rage Randy.
Self-defense system sold separately.
He's a senior writer for Sports Illustrated. You can read his West Coast State of Mind series as part of the Monday Morning Quarterback team. Please welcome Sports Illustrated's Jim Trotter to the Jason Fitz Show. Jim, thanks so much for coming on with me, buddy.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to talk about West Coast teams because I know that's your focus. But before we get there, you're really active on Twitter, a lot more active than several other writers, at @SI_Jim Trotter. If you don't follow him, you should. And you tweeted something earlier that I thought was interesting. It was a retweet of an AP tweet, and it said, "The income gap between the richest and poorest Americans is at its greatest since the Roaring '20s. I thought that was interesting that you tweeted that on the same day that Ndamukong Suh was fined $100,000. That's obviously more money than a lot of American households are going to make in a year. So, my question to you on that fine kind of specifically is, do you think this is a statement from the league to him as a player, or is this a statement to the league to all players for the way they're blocking?
Oh, I think it's both. I think that because he's a repeat offender, I think the league went heavy-handed on him. And I think also they want to send a message or use him as an example to say to others, there are certain things that aren't going to be tolerated. So, the league rarely does anything without looking at the bigger picture. So I absolutely believe that there was a twofold message here.
Is this going to open the door to bigger fines all the way across the board, do you think?
Well, it could, but again, it's normally with repeat offenders where you get the bigger fines. The league will go a little bit easier if you don't have a history. But when you have a player such as Ndamukong Suh who, has a history of I can't even call it questionable. I would just call it bad on-field behavior. Then, they're going to act very strongly. And I think that had that been more malicious, if you will, I think there's a chance he could have been suspended because he's basically a repeat offender. But that was the type of block that we've seen from players in the past. I mean, we've seen it from offensive linemen against defensive linemen. But that's something that the league is now trying to take out of the game. And so I think that's why, to some degree, it was more heavy-handed in this instance.
There's a lot of Raiders fans that listen to this show specifically, and you are coming off of kind of an interesting time because you had really unparalleled access to the team for an extended period. And what's kind of interesting is that you're bullish this year on the Raiders at 6 wins, which is a sad statement. What did you see in your level of access that has you think that this team's a little more capable than maybe the rest of the media nationally thinks?
Well, I think when I said I thought the Raiders could reach 6 wins, it was prior to Jared Beldier going down. And it was actually prior to even Terrell Pryor being named the starter. It was more of just looking at what they had done in the offseason. I'm not so sure. I still feel that way simply from this standpoint. Beldier was a big loss for them. And the other thing is defensively, I expected them to be better than they were in the preseason. Now, they played well in week 1 at Indy, but my concern with Oakland is that there's no depth on the roster, and it's very rare for a team to go through a 16-game season fully healthy. And I just think that they're going to have injuries at some point, and I think they're going to take a toll, and they're going to manifest themselves in terms of big plays one way or the other. One thing I do like Terrell Pryor. I think that, I've always thought that he's a very hardworking, conscientious guy, and it matters to him. That's something that's critical to me when I start looking at players. It's how much do they love the game and how much does it matter to them to be successful. And it means an awful lot to him from every conversation I've had with him. So I think he's going to do some good things. I was very pleasantly surprised by how their defense performed in week 1, but I think to really get a feel for whether or not they're going to reach 6 wins or not, if you ask me at the quarter point, I can give you a more honest assessment simply from the standpoint then we'll have a book on them and we'll have a better idea of what their strengths and weaknesses
and you
are.
mentioned they're a thin team, and the salary cap problems are well documented as well. But you said something in your previous writings that, Reggie McKenzie has to be spot on in this year's draft. And you were making a greater point that even if he is spot on in this last draft, this is still a mediocre football team at best. So as we head into the season, looking hindsight on that draft, do you think that McKenzie did what he needed to do, even with the handcuffs that he had, to make this as successful a team as it can be?
Just I'll tell you this. I'm not one of these guys who looks at a draft and gives it a grade right away. Sure. I understand why that's done in the culture we live in today, but I'm one of these people that really believes in giving a draft class time to develop because it's very tough for any rookie to come in and play well right away. So in terms of what I said there, by being spot on, it might not mean that those guys would manifest themselves immediately as good or great players. It means that they have to develop into that. When I saw DJ Hayden in training camp, he wasn't involved in live contact at that point, but you could see little things about him that intrigued you in terms of his foot quickness, his athletic ability. Now the question becomes, what's his football acumen? How quickly does he catch on to things? And he had told me at that point his head was spinning a bit from all the different defenses that the Raiders run and whatnot. So I don't know how quickly he's going to come on. So that's a long-winded way of me saying at this point, I don't know if Reggie hit on this draft yet because it's still too early. These guys have to get on the field and show us what they can do.
They also had the injury to Watson, who was a high draft pick, and that makes this even tougher to evaluate. I understand that. But given the success of some draft classes. I mean, it's hard not to look at Indianapolis, realizing that that's not something that happens for everybody. But Indianapolis last year was able to bring in a class that had several impactful rookies early on. It was a huge part of why they turned it around. In Oakland, they would have to have that same level of impact from this draft class almost immediately to make any sort of a drastic turnaround, wouldn't they?
Right, but I would say this to you. When we look at Indy's draft class, we're looking at it in hindsight. Going into last year, I don't think that you could necessarily say that all of those rookies were going to have an impact. Now, we knew Andrew Luck was a special kid and that he was going to play well. But other than that, there was no way of really knowing. So that's all I'm saying. Oakland may have a couple of players who step out, rookies who step out and perform well this year. But I'm not at a point where I can say I believe that that's going to happen or they're going to do that. I just need to see a little bit more from them at this point.
And speaking of a little bit more and changing to a different team on the West Coast, but Mike McCoy obviously takes over. It's hard not to come out of the Chargers loss feeling like it's the same old Chargers team. That seems to be a recurring theme from fans. But that's not really a fair statement when so much of the organization has changed. So from your eyes, what do you see that's different about this year's Chargers team than the previous ones?
Well, I'll tell you, when people say same old team, I think they're speaking primarily culturally in terms of the mental makeup of a team. This was a club that would get leads last year and couldn't hold them, and everyone reflects on the 24-0 halftime lead against Denver and then losing that game. Well, last night you're up 28-7 in the third quarter, and again you end up giving up 24 straight points. So I think that's what people mean by the same old team. It's sort of that same lack of mental toughness, if you will, to close out games and to finish. The thing I saw yesterday was some of that, but I also saw again where the game got tight and the pressure was on, that you see Phillip Rivers throw a pick six. And he has got to get away from that. I don't know how you do it. I know this year they focused on him getting rid of the ball quicker. They have focused on shorter passes, check downs, those sorts of things. And for much of that game he played well. But again, when it got tight, and folks got nervous, that pick six, turns the game there. I know people are going to focus on the penalty that shouldn't have been a penalty on Houston's field goal attempt, but I would make the case that San Diego still had a chance to close out that game despite that penalty and was unable to do it. So, San Diego just has to, in my opinion, San Diego has to get better in terms of converting third downs in critical situations, particularly in the second half. They were awful at that last night. They were awful in the fourth quarter offensively. They never gave their defense a chance to rest in the second half. It was on the field. I think there were 4 or 5 straight 3-and-outs in that second half. Just can't happen.
Well, and you mentioned the culture of losing, the culture of finding ways to lose. I guess it strikes me in week one, not just for the Chargers, but for the Raiders and even for the Bills. There's a certain element of good teams find a way to win, and bad teams seem to find a way to lose. When you're mired in the middle of that, though, and when you're stuck in one of those situations, how do you break out as a team? How do you find a way to change that?
The simple answer is you win a game. Winning covers up a lot of ills, provides a lot of momentum, and that's what anyone will tell you. Win a game, and you start to develop sort of a new mentality that things can change. I'll say something to you, for instance, I don't believe in moral victories, but I believe you can see things even in a defeat that can carry a team through a season. I'll give you, for instance, watching Green Bay and San Francisco play on Sunday, being at that game. Last year there was a feeling internally in Green Bay that the Packers were somewhat fragile when situations got tight or when all of a sudden they would squander a lead late in the game. And it was almost more of a can we come back as opposed to we will come back. And when I watched them play San Francisco, a team they had lost to twice last year, when I watched that game on Sunday, I saw more resolve in the Packers, particularly at the end of the first half when things aren't going right, to go down and get a score there and make it an interesting game, to play well in the third quarter, even make some plays in the fourth, even though they didn't win. But you sense, at least I do, or I did, a tougher mentality on that team that I think is going to carry that team and benefit that team through the course of this season. With Oakland against Indy, you saw some resolve. You saw some toughness that, yeah, we know Indy's favored and this, that, and the other, and we're on the road, but we're going to fight, we're going to claw. The only question I have is, besides that, is can you play with that kind of emotion and that kind of intensity for 16 weeks? That's a tough thing to do in this league. So, teams generally have letdowns here and there. Oakland's not the type of team that it can afford any sort of mental letdown, because it'll get beat.
Another thing that stood out in the Raiders-Colts game specifically was kind of a shift in game plan for the Raiders compared to what a lot of teams are doing. I think when you look at Week 1 stats, when you have Whedon throwing 53 times, Flacco throwing 62 times in the game, I think it's kind of staggering that 10 quarterbacks threw 40 or more attempts. The Raiders came in with a very ball control-oriented offense, which was expected, but it was effective. They kind of controlled the clock. Is that going to be the method for a lot of these teams to try and slow down teams like Denver? Are they going to have to control the clock?
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just control the clock. It's also, if you have a young quarterback, eliminating the opportunities for mistakes through the passing game. And we all know that Terrell Pryor isn't an accomplished passer. We know that he's worked hard the last couple of years to improve, and he is improving. But right now, that is not the strength of his game. So as Greg Olson, the offensive coordinator, has told him, we know what your strength is in terms of your athleticism and your mobility. That's your foundation. Now let's build on that. So I think what the team is trying to do is play to his strength as well as control the clock and try and shorten the game. Because what Oakland wants to do, even if Matt Flynn had been the quarterback, the feeling or the blueprint for this season coming in was, let's play strong defense, keep the score down, let's limit our mistakes on offense, and now let's get to the fourth quarter and try and make a play with Darren McFadden or one of the other guys and win a game. So the quarterback has changed, but not necessarily the blueprint.
Well, and Jim, I'm going to leave you with this. I'm not asking you to predict anything. What I'm asking is, from your eyes, from what you've already seen in training camp and early in the season, is there a team that kind of stands out to you that you feel like has the chance to be special that maybe everybody else doesn't consider in that category yet?
I wouldn't say be special, but I think has a chance to be better than people thought. The teams that I mentioned then were, and this is going to sound silly after what happened in Week 1, but I thought that Tampa and I thought Miami had opportunities to be better than what a lot of people thought. Tampa ends up blowing that game against the Jets. Miami wins. So it's a mixed bag. But I also thought this year that Pittsburgh would rebound. But then the injuries that they had in Week 1 to go with other injuries they've had, I don't feel so good about that. So maybe I'll just stick with Miami and try and ride that out as we go forward.
Well, again, we're not asking for predictions. It's just always interesting to see from an eye that gets to watch more than the casual fan. Obviously, the NFL and the fan base for the NFL, it's a very reactionary league. I mean, your team is awful one week and great the next, but it's a really long season. So it's interesting just to get your perspective.
You're absolutely right, but because there are only 16 games, we live in a world of extremes in the NFL, and it's not just the NFL, but I think it's sports in general now, where one team or some person, you always have to have a greatest and a worst, and there is no middle ground. And at least with me, I try and stay in the middle of that, and try and be a little more rational about it. The first week of the season is usually the time when fans overreact most, because they want to make a lot of generalizations or jump to conclusions about things that they saw in Week 1. And you and I both know you can go back through the history of this league and look at teams that have played really well in the opener and have played really poorly in the opener, and it means nothing by the end of the year. I think back to a year where New England got beat 31-0 by Buffalo in the season opener and went on to win the Super Bowl. So, I'm not one of those guys that overreacts to this stuff, but I understand why it does happen.
Well, Jim, we appreciate you taking time. If you don't follow him, you should. He's at @SI_Jim Trotter, senior writer for Sports Illustrated, West Coast State of Mind on Monday Morning Quarterback. Jim, thanks so much for coming on the Jason Fitz Show.
All right, Jason. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Jason Fitz Show, brought to you by LittleTeammates.com, LILTeammates.com. They're only the coolest sports toys in the entire world. They happen to be affordable. They happen to be awesome. And if you go to the website and enter the coupon code FITZFANS, you'll get 20% off your order. Check them out, LittleTeammates.com.
MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. All of these social media sites have kept us entertained for years, ladies. But let's face it, they don't help us with what we want the most. That's why I'm here to remind you about the newest and greatest site for men and women, Pinterest. Walls for whatever you're into. Check out Wacky Willie's Wall of Wonkers or a Deviant Dan Dangling Dongs. From partner ideas to good old-fashioned chained up in the basement fun. It's all covered. Finally, you can learn the do-rights and all the do-me-oh-so-wrongs at Pinterest.
So the big news of the day seems to be the Oklahoma State violations, or alleged violations, that they were paying players and that they were facilitating ways to stack their roster and give performance incentives and pay all these kids to play college football. The controversy there makes a lot of sense because when you take a look at the number of players drafted, I mean, there's been a huge uptick in the last 10 years of the number of Oklahoma State players that have actually been able to go on to the NFL. I mean, you look, there was a gap. I mean, they had a couple players drafted in 89, and then R.W. McQuarters was in 98, but there really wasn't a lot of draft activity. And then you look at 2003, 4, 9, 10, 12. They had draftees in all of those. You look at the number of players drafted in the Mike Gundy era, it's pretty staggering. So, yes, there's obviously been an uptick in talent. But what I think is interesting is that it never led to real uptick in results on the field. And I'm talking huge results. I mean, if you're going to pay players, shouldn't you at least get results on the field for your team? And I'm not just talking about winning a bowl game. I'm not talking about a top 5 finish. And in fact, during this whole time that they were supposedly doing this, they only had one top 5 AP finish. One during that time. So what I'm saying is that we're not just talking about winning bowl games. If you're going to pay where no one else is, if you're going to do the extra thing monetarily, no one else is, and that's part of your under the table recruiting effort, because you know it has to be. If that's the way you're building the program and all you're managing to do is win some bowl games, that's simply not enough. That's a terrible return of investment. If there's any fault here to me, it's not that they paid players, it's that they wasted the boosters' money. If I were a booster, I'd be angry. I'd be pissed off that they took my money and couldn't at least get me a national title for it. I mean, tell me that they turned around and won a bunch of rings for it, and we'd say, well, I see why they did it. But in fact, all they did was they won some mediocre bowl-winning games. I mean, they even had a losing season in that period. That's a really bad return of investment. If there's anything to yell at the coaches about, it's about the fact that they wasted a lot of people's money. And while we're on the subject of wasting money, can we finally admit that Texas and USC are both just throwing money away this year? I mean, these are terrible coaches. There is no reason at this point that Lane Kiffin should still have a job. And I understand that Mac Brown is he's a legacy coach. He's deserves to stay where he is because he meant so much to the program. But the program has declined so quickly, so sharply. It's almost like watching a quarterback that seems to be in his prime, and all of a sudden you wake up and it's like the start of the next season and they can't throw anymore. Somehow, seemingly overnight, Mac Brown lost the ability to recruit or the ability to coach. I mean, these teams are just not good. And a great coach with a great school can lose a game. That's not a big deal. But a great coach of a great school cannot get embarrassed by a mediocre opponent. And that's what happened in the Texas game. I mean, this is not a new point, but you have to see the fact that if BYU runs for 500 yards in a game, there's a problem. Now, I'll be interested. We're going to look at this a little bit on Friday's show. I'm going to classic teaser here. I'm going to tease Friday's show. But we're going to look at this a little bit. I want to talk to Coach. I want to talk to Coach Lance, and I want to see from a coach's perspective, when you change a defensive coordinator, again, we've talked about the limited practice time allowed to these athletes. So when you change a defensive coordinator this quickly into a season, what difference can it really make right now? You can't integrate an all-new defense. There isn't enough time. So while everyone can say that Mac Brown did what he needed to do to try and save his job, all he probably did was buy himself a little bit of time. But the wheels have come off. The wheels have come off of Texas, and Texas is no longer dominant. And that's bad for that school. That's bad for football. I mean, we live in this era now where it's the SEC or nothing. And I said this last year at the national title, and I still believe it. The absolute best thing that could happen for the game, for the sport of college football, would be for the SEC to make the national title game, as it will, to face a non-SEC opponent and to lose. It would be good for the sport. We're in that era where basketball was in for a while, where the Bulls won every year, and then the Lakers won every year. Now the Heat are going to win every year. And eventually that just becomes boring to the fans. We need the Texases of the world. We need schools like that to be great so that there's a legitimate threat to the SEC. And what the hell has happened to USC football? I mean, how do you go from being a juggernaut that just can't be beat to all of a sudden having this happen? Now, I know the recruiting violations. I understand Pete Carroll's gone. I know the schematics of how this happened. But I still can't believe that the school itself isn't such an alluring sell that they can get talented athletes, which means if they can get talented athletes and they're going to consistently be this bad, that means that there's a problem coaching. We're already forgetting the fact that last season they were a preseason number one that led to nothing. And we're sitting here the same place we've all been. If you've watched Lane Kiffin's career, there have been countless times that people have sat there and said, how does this guy have a job? And it's happened at every stop. Well, I'm tired of asking it. USC, come on, just get off the pot. It is that time. You've either got to go or get off the pot. And it is time to get rid of Lane Kiffin. What do you have to lose? What is there to lose by firing Lane Kiffin tomorrow? You've become a laughingstock. You have a coach that is not well respected. Players are not gravitating to the university because they know that he doesn't have longevity. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. So what benefit is there to keeping him throughout the season? It's only making it a circus show at USC. Just get rid of the damn guy. Now, the last thing that really stood out to me in the weekend of college football games, I alluded to last week in one of the episodes, but I want to go back to it because I'm not sure that I've seen a bigger dick move in a long time by a head coach than Urban Meyer going for 2 against Buffalo. And it got me to thinking about it. You know, when we talked to Jeff Lockridge last Friday, one of the things we talked to Jeff about was the character and how a football team takes on the character of its coach. And certain organizations, certain programs look for real character guys. Character's, again, a word that's used all the time in the game of college football. And I got to thinking about that with Urban Meyer, and I think that this actually plays into his character, because the character that Urban Meyer wants on that squad, no matter what squad he's coaching, the character he wants is the villain. It's the bad guy. And a villain is still a character. He cares about one thing. He cares about winning, and he cares about winning in a decisive way that sends a message. And the message he seems to be concerned about sending at Ohio State seems to be this sort of pissed off, you're either with us or against us edge. Now, is that a good reflection of the school? Absolutely not. Do you think all of the news that's come out about the handling of Hernandez in Florida is a good reflection of the University of Florida or a good reflection of Urban Meyer? No. But let's get real. Let's just cut through all that BS and get down to the real point. And the real point is nobody cares. If they win games, if they win a national title, Ohio State fans don't care if the school is well reflected by the student athletes. They don't even care if they're student athletes. Let's just be real for a minute. Nobody cares what the kid's GPA is. They care if he can run, throw, jump, catch. That's what they care about. That's what fans care about. And that's what Urban Meyer has figured out. And that's how he's building this team. He is building his team with a chip on their shoulder and absolute disregard for anything sportsmanlike, an absolute disregard for being good people, an absolute disregard for trying to be, the consummate student athlete. They're not poster children and they're not role models, but they win games. And ultimately, that's what makes him a millionaire. That's what makes him a great coach. And that's what the fans of the school love. They'll love him when he's there. They'll hate him if he leaves, but they'll love him when he's there. And that's the interesting thing about Urban Meyer. Look, we're going to dig more into college football on the Friday episode. As always, check for jasonfitz.com. Just go out there and check it out. We'll have some writers on. We'll have Coach on. We're going to talk about some of the matchups this weekend. All right, that's it for another week of the Jason Fitz Show, guys. If you're into the music side of what I do, be sure to watch the Arsenio Hall Show. We're actually going to be on it this coming Monday, Monday the 16th, Arsenio Hall. Check it out. And also, remember, if you're into the music side of what I do, you have the chance to win a violin signed by the entire touring organization for the band Perry. All you have to do is go to littleteammates.com and buy something. If you buy anything at littleteammates.com and you enter the coupon code FITZFANS, you're automatically entered to win for every single thing that you buy from the site. So you can enter as many times as you want. You can buy as many awesome sports toys as you you want and get the chance to win a violin signed by everybody in the Band Perry organization. In the meantime, don't forget to tune in here Friday for the college preview show. We're going to have Coach come back on for the Coach's Corner. We're going to look at some great matchups, have some guests on. It will be awesome. And then on Sunday, as always, we're going to take a look at game day in the NFL. Got some great beat writers lined up for that. So check out jasonfitz.com. Special thanks to Sports Illustrated's Jim Trotter for coming on the show today. Hit me up, jasonfitz.com. Get to all the social media. Let me know what you think of the show. And keep tuning in. Thanks for listening to The Jason Fitz Show, brought to you by LittleTeammates.com.